Well, since I'm still avoiding the topic of creating your own map from scratch, that will possibly scare away every new user who's still learning, having to explain 1,000 things just so you can make your own wall, and then having to Ruby map it and assign materials and shaders and... Wait, I've said too much. Trees! That's right, in this tutorial we are going to be moving out of the safety of Inventor's Skill Borrowed and move into the forest. And by that I mean make our own forest and then move into it. Now, SerousZone tree, well, not really tree spawns, could be found in... Yeah, busy mates busy, can't found you. See, okay, ignore that, nothing to see here. Keep watching what I'm doing with my mouse cursor. Where was I? Could be found in content SerousZone 3 models plants, but I can't really say that SerousZone has a lot of trees, and I myself am too selfish to upload the ones I'm doing, so we're going to be using artificial trees. Yes, a certain SerousZone user by the name of Artifica, also known by a few other names, took time to make a few trees and make a little resource pack for anyone who is lacking any green flora in their levels. Now, I searched for like half an hour for his download link, and then I got someone else to search for it. So I'm going to save you all of that and post a link to this pack in the description down below. So take that and then pause and download that, since we'll be using these in the next chapters of the tutorial. Okay, so once you download the thing, go to the containing folder and copy or cut the Go file from the download location, then go to your SerousZone 3 folder found in, well, Steam apps, common, SerousZone 3, but I have it on quick launch here. It's easier to access. Now, go to content, SerousZone 3, and paste your Go file here. Any downloaded Go file for the appropriate game has to be placed in this folder. Steam apps, common, SerousZone 3, content, SerousZone 3, so that the game or editor will load and be able to use it. Alright, once you load the editor, go to File, New, and document.word. This will be our, or maybe not first, but one of the first new worlds you'll be making from scratch. Insert a new model file, and go to, I'm already there, but artificial trees can be found in content, SerousZone 3 models, z_cmp_trees, and let's add one. Wait for it to load a bit. Like so. Pretty nice, no? Of course, now take that tree and delete it, because we won't be using these trees for several chapters of the tutorial. Yes, they come later. First things first, we need to make a new terrain. Now start with adding a simple model file, insert key, simple model, and this time make sure it's placed in the center of your world, x, y, and z 0, 0, 0, and this time, instead of using browse, we're going to do something scary and enter the mesh editor. The shortcut for that is E. Dun dun dun. We have entered the mesh editor. Can also be accessed via this drop down menu. So if you're in the world editor and forget the shortcut, you can click here and access any other editor available. You have quite a lot, but don't let this intimidate you, just use the mesh editor for now. And our encounter with the mesh editor will be too brief to have it actually become scary or frightening. Now, the first thing, add a simple terrain, and we can do that from Shift and P, brings down the sub-menu of primitives. You have the standard ones and the terrain. Or you can use the sideways panel, this thing here, and go to create, primitives, terrain. When you click one of the primitives, you won't see anything, and that's because, well, I'm not sure if that's a bug or anything, but you need to edit one of the dimension properties first. In our case, let's use height to be 0, and length and width to be 200. This is sufficient. You can control the detail of the terrain, the subdivisions on the X and Z axis from these two options. Let's use 464. And you have other things like center of the primitive. For example, if I want to create the terrain file to be located 10 units from the simple model center, I can input 10 and it will be over there. Now, this applies to the center of the simple model, not the center of the world. So if your model is located, I know, at X plus 10, when you place your model file at 10, the actual primitive will be actually at X, Y 20. That's something to keep in mind when working with the primitives too. Now that you've set your mind on the terrain, use D key to drop it, and you have inserted your very first mesh. You can use the numpad plus key to select all of the polygons in the model you're editing, and you can see their number from down here. In our case, that's 4096 polygons, and that's very okay. We are not in the 20s now. So the second thing we need to do for our terrain is to go through layer down here and expand polygon maps, and under default click on the arrow and use browse. Now wrong arrow, new shader preset. Got a bit carried away there. Now these things, I won't go into detail about what either of these are, because that would scare you away. Just do what I tell you. Under material attributes, go to browse, and you need to navigate through content SerousZone databases materials, and find the material you want your ground to be. In our case, we want to be what? Is there a grass material in SEM3? Oh, there is. Select grass. And now when you walk or shoot any polygon of this model, it will display or play or do the grass particle sound effect. Now under configuration, use the yellow plus sign to add a new shader. And a shader in modern graphics is pretty much, well, it can do a lot of things. In our case, we will use the, keep ignoring that thing down there. Where was I? In our case, use shader, go to browse, and you will get a choice menu of all the shaders in SerousZone 3. Now it has quite a few, some of them more useful than others, but for our very simple and easy and totally not scary tutorial, we're going to use a very simple standard shader. In my case, every time I say simple, you should be just as scared as when someone tells you that something is easy as just. I don't know why I said that. Now the standard shader has a few options, and the ones we're interested in is the base texture. If you've lost the path, we're in polygon maps, default configurations, shader. All of these are expanded. You will find that the SerousZone has quite a few very long option paths like that. I keep sidetracking. Go to the base texture, and we're going to find and apply our very first texture. Now, the protein textures can be found under content, SerousZone 3, textures, General or generic? General? Wrong. Generic. Keep ignoring that. I don't know how to pixelate anything. Not my fault. Now after you're at content SerousZone 3 textures generic ground, you can use the F3 preview to find a texture you like. Yes, there's no texture browser window, like in other engines such as Source or Unreal, but you will eventually get accustomed to this way of thinking. Just to find something interesting. Well, yeah, fresh grass 04 looks cool, but you may not have this particular texture, so in your case, let's use something that's I know for certain can be found by default. And I actually don't think that SerousZone 3 has any grass textures. So if you don't have a texture, well, I can help you. Now once you've set a base texture of your liking, we're going to proceed to adding a UV map, and in our case we can use the very useful capital Y / plane projection. Now what this is pretty much a, well, global Y-plane planar projection for the UV map of the texture, and what all of those words mean is that, well, polygons facing the Y-axis get a texture projected on them as if your view is top-down, and you apply a texture relative to every, well, to the view angle of the Y-plane. So if I move a polygon, you can select and move polygons. The very same rules apply as if you're in the rotator. So if you move a polygon, you can see that the faces that start to angle towards the Z-axis get a very stretched texture when looked from the side, but if I look at them straight top down, it looks perfectly normal. And this is pretty much what the Y-plane UV map projection does. Apply your texture as if you're looking at it top down. We can scale this down to 0.3, well, 3 close keys, and this is a very good number for most textures and when using the Y-plane projection. Also, this is a good excuse for not having to tell you guys how to make your own UV maps right now. Once you've set your texture, UV map, and the scale, you can exit the mesh editor mode, again by E, or using the drop-down menu here, and playtest your new world like normal. But I'm lagging because I'm recording, so can't really playtest this. But this is how you do it, just... Okay, back to the world editor. By now you've probably noticed that when you move your camera around, the brightness rapidly shifts depending on what you're looking at. And this is no bug, this is intended functionality, and it's called tone mapping, or also known as high definition rendering imagery. What it tries to do is pretty much adjust the gamma and brightness values of your view depending on the brightness and darkness of objects that you're looking at, pretty much how a human eye reacts to lightning. To demonstrate this better, I've set up a half-baked demonstration here. I've made a simple corridor that from the outside, the interior of it is almost dark and can be seen, but as I move closer, you will see the HDR algorithm starting to compensate and the interior gets really bright. And likewise, when I look outside, I see total whiteness. Pretty much just like how the human eye reacts to lightning. This is a very cool effect, and if you've played Half-Life Lost Coasts, you would remember that Valve was pretty impressed with the thing. But for now we'll just get rid of it because new users, well, will just find it annoying. And it's in such extreme values that it gets in the way pretty fast. One way to disable tone mapping is to go to rendering and turn off camera effects, image processing, and tone mapping. And now the tone mapping is disabled. As you can see, I can enter the corridors and everything is normal. But this won't apply when actually testing your level in game. So a permanent solution is to add from effects, a post-processing effect. Get it? We're adding effects to remove effects. Now from the choose entity properties, go to post-processing, browse, and navigate to content, SerousZone free, databases again, or was it somewhere else? Wait, I always get these two confused. Now in our case we want SIG content, SerousZone free presets, and from presets go to post-processing and select the SerousZone free default. And this pretty much disables the HDRI or tone mapping in your level. Before moving on, I'm just going to mention that the SerousZone free dynamic allows a very small amount of HDRI, and you might want to use that if you want to experience the effect to some degree, but not have it go way over the top like it did to me. But it's very mild, so might as well just use the default one. Now once we've set this up, we can get back to the terrain and start adding some features. Alright, back to the mesh editor. We can start creating our hue terrain for the forest. A hard way to make the hues would be to manually select each and every polygon and start moving them around to create hues. This of course would be very lengthy and it would take us forever to do, and for that CodeTeam has given us the Paint and Displace tool found under, well, your side panel, Modify, Paint and Displace, and the shortcut is N. And what this does is pretty much allows you to, well, paint height to your terrain. If I click and hold my left mouse button, you will see that I'm already starting to create some nice, well, lumps to my terrain. Ignore that. Now the side panel, under tools, you get some options for the paint and displace tool, such as paint operation, brush mode, displace direction. Well, you can see you have eyes, I don't need to read all of these. I'm going to only note the ones that we're going to use now, since the paint and displace tool has more options and more functionality that I can cover in one tutorial. The one that we need is meters per second. What this does is pretty much, well, how much meters the brush displaces per second. So if I input 2, the brush operation gets really slow, and this is useful for creating small adjustments in your hues. And if I want a faster one, like make some mass creation of mountains, I can input 20 and go around and play God with my terrain. For now, let's just use 8 and continue with the tutorial. You can control the brush operation by holding down Alt, and what this means is invert operation. Normally it adds to the height, and if I hold down Alt, it subtracts. So I can use this to create a little riverbed here, or some valley or canyon. I can control the size of the brush if I hold down Alt and Shift, and if I drag with my left mouse button, I get to control the size of the brush. Let's adjust it a bit. Something like this. I can also change the brush texture with the hard edge brackets, so I can cycle through all loaded brushes if I press the right one. The most useful brushes are the first one, the soft edge, and the last one, the hard edge one, that allows me to create canyons or plateaus like that. You can even create your custom brushes if you go through the brush palette window, which also has a shortcut of Alt and B. And from here I get some more precise controls over my brush. For example, I have the strength value, the size, which is pretty much exactly the same as holding down Alt and Shift and dragging. We have throw off, hotspot, and various other options for the other functionality of the brush and paint tool, but I'm going to go through all of these later, so ignore for pretend that they don't exist. There we go. Now you can create your own brush if you press the yellow plus sign, and it adds a new one with the default throw off and hotspot. Pretty much what the hotspot does is this is the radius in which the brush effect percentage is 100, and the throw off is pretty much a gradient. This throw off from the 100% apply function through 0. So if I want a really smooth brush, I can crank this up to a very high value and get a very smooth operation. The little green number here, this tells me how large the brush texture is. The default size is 32, and if I get higher than that, it tells me that in these green letters here. So I usually say keep it within 32 by 32 pixels, since that is more than okay. You can even load custom brush textures if you add a new one and press the 3 dot button, and this allows me to select a actual texture to use as a brush. Now the texture needs to have an alpha channel, and the alpha channel is actually used as a texture, not the RGB and blue channel of the texture. One very useful brush texture I found is located in Content 0.3 Texture Stains, and is called Stain01 Gloss Mask, GM, which usually stands for Gloss Map. Now when I load that, you'll see that the texture is applied, and everywhere where the texture is visible, a paint operation is applied, and where it's not, well, you get the idea. I can use the stains texture to add some noise to my terrain, and it's very useful in that regard. With custom textures, you won't get the black and white positive and negative operation of the texture of the brush, so you'll have to know, but it still works. If I hold out, it subtracts height, and if I let go, it adds to it, even though I don't see the brush texture change. Now let's continue making our hues, and I will see you in the next chapter. Alright, got a terrain made. A few things I forgot to tell you about the paint and displace tool was that you can also use this to smooth your terrain. From paint operation, choose smooth. And what this does is pretty much apply a smoothing to the terrain. As you can see, I have this very rugged shape here, and I can smooth that out. Another thing I had to say was that usually by default, the paint tool has this option enabled by default, only selected. And what this does is pretty much make it apply its effects only on polygons that you've selected. So if I select a bunch of polygons, like so, and enter the tool, the operation will only be applied to those polygons, even though I hold my mouse button around other parts of the terrain. And if I deselect them and enter back the brush mode, it's going to apply on the entire terrain, even though we have this enabled. So if your brush tool isn't working, it might be because you have a polygon selected somewhere and you might want to disable this. You can also control the paint texture directly from here, and you can hide the brush shape, in which case the white blot is removed, and in its place, in its general direction is displayed by this reddish square, but the brush texture is still the same, it's just hidden. There's also ignore backface polygons, but these are the rest are advanced functionality, so ignore those for now. I'm going to make other tutorials in the future that will explain the other magical operations of the paint and displace tool. Alright, now that we finally set up our terrain, we can start adding those trees I talked about earlier. The simplest way to do that would be to just create a new simple model, browse for one of Artificia's trees, and then just copy paste it around the place. And this would work in most cases, but a far more clever and college-educated plan for mass forestation would be to use the array rectangular tool and create a mass amount of clones, randomize them, and then drop them down. To do that, we can add a simple model and rename it to tree big and place it somewhere, well, in the middle, I guess, or the side. Now move it far up in the sky so that it's above any mountain, so that it's above the highest point on your terrain. Go to the array rectangular tool, and since Artificia's trees are a bit high polygonal, we're going to use only 4x4 clones of the large tree. So we put 4x4 on the X and Z axis. For offsets, we're going to need to play around with this. Yeah, I found out that for this map, -15 by -15 works pretty well, with a jitter offset by 50. And this will give us a very nice, randomly spaced set of model files, all named tree big. Now position these over your terrain, and you can actually stretch out the distance between each and one of them if I used Ctrl and Shift and left mouse button, like so. But remember that if you're stretching a selection of models, you also stretch their model instance stretch, so remember to reset the stretch value from entity stretch and set it to 1 on every axis. And now just drop them down, and the shortcut for this is page down. To continue adding the other flora, just rinse and repeat the previous process. And now that we've selected set all the models, let's adjust the tree model. The reason I'm using the simple default box is because that every time I use drop down, it actually measures the distance between the model, the entity, and anything it hits. So if I already have a tree there, like so, and want to drop down another model file that's above the tree, it's actually going to get stuck in the tree instead of landing on the terrain. So this is why it's a good idea to use the default box model that has no collision, and only then choose a model file for all of your trees, for all the instances. Now I'm just adding the tree files. It's already starting to lag, but yeah, it's actually lagging pretty much. So to fix the frame rate, unfortunately, let's get rid of all the small trees and change the purpose of some of these trees to something else. Like so. Protein trees probably won't lag, but that's for you to figure out. There we go. Now our trees may have a random position, but their qualities surely aren't random, and most players would probably notice that, and it won't look as realistic as it could. We can of course do this manually, from stretch, change their size, and rotate them manually again. But Grow team again thought about this and gave us the randomise tool. And what this does is pretty much randomize a selected quality of a model by a given amount. Don't confuse, by the way, this randomise tool with the randomise tool found in common. Different tools, and one of them doesn't do anything. The one we need is found under miscellaneous, and it's named randomise, and the shortcut is Shift Alt and R. When you activate it, you will get this small box, and you will get to select which property you're going to change. You can change the rotation, stretch, and stretch all. So we can go from a minimum stretch of 0.5 to a maximum stretch of 1.4, and when I press enter, it's going to apply the change. And then simply drop the tool by pressing X and go and invoke it again to change the rotation. We need the pitch rotation. Wait, no, banking, heading, that's right. And input a heading value of minimum 0 to maximum of 380. And now all of the rotation and stretches are randomized, and they look fairly more realistic. Deep breaths, we're almost through this tutorial. Now to finalize our map, I'm going to rush you through setting up a background and the sunlight to light your forest, because the default light settings are more or less boring. Also, you don't have any shadows. To start with, let's add a background, and this is done by going to Entity List, then Geometry, then Cube Background. Click and drag and drop it. And if you're in numpad 6, like I am, you're already going to see a white background take over the regular default one. Let's go to numpad 9, that disables the background, and move the background box somewhere out of the map. And we do that because, one, we don't want to see a background box hovering somewhere in the distance, and also everything that's inside the box gets projected as if it's a background. So for example, I placed a tree down there, and I can see it in the background. To use something other than a white texture, we can use the texture field, go to browse, and navigate to content CSM free textures, backgrounds. And here we have quite a few very nice ones, mostly located in Hyperfocal, which also happens to be a site offering backgrounds, but you have to pay for them. So no free backgrounds for you other than the ones that Grow team gave us. Now we can use the preview to select a texture, like for example something sunny, like these Aculum clouds, and pretty much it will automatically load all of the other textures. For actual shadows to be projected, we need to add a distant light. And this is pretty much a planar light that projects shadows from a single plane in the distance, as represented by this little box here. The wider area is defines the plane that shadows are going to be projected from. And you can see its range as the orangey box. A very easy trick to position your distant light would be to enter a view from entity mode, shortcut for it is Y, and then use the escape key and ASD and W keys to move, and at the same time you're also moving the entity. So you can place it so that you're looking at the sun. The sun of the background is in the middle of the center of the screen. Exit the view from entity mode. Then from tools, simply invert the rotation of your light. And we can do this by adding 180 to the pitch value. So this happens to be 180, 230. And this creates a almost perfect match for the shadows to match the sun. Position it so that the orange box is almost in the center, and use the Control and Shift key plus right mouse button, left mouse button to stretch out the shadow box range. But you can also manually input the dimensions of it if you go to entity, shadow, and then use shadow depth, height, and width. Don't use a very large shadow box, because the larger it is, the less detailed your shadows are. So for example, I stretched it now to 2000, and you can see that the shadows are very well blurred. And if I stretch it down to just 200 again, you can see that the shadows are far more detailed. To finalize this, aka give the shadows some sort of color, we need to add one final thing, and that is the probe light. And what this does is pretty much apply an environment lighting or color to the shadows and models that aren't in direct sunlight of your distant light. So in a way, these do act like lights, but they're pre-baked and they are dependent on the environment they are in. So stretch out the area of effect again, and then use Shift and B to bake the fast light, probe light. And now your shadows have color. Now in the last few things I more or less rushed, because they weren't in the scope of this tutorial. So yeah, not much explanation going on here. I'm going to eventually go in more detail about the probe light and the distant light in the background in further tutorials. For now, have fun creating terrains, and I'll see you eventually.